I'd like to welcome everyone to the study session for the special study session for the Scottsdale Unified School District Governing Board. Today is January 4th. The time is 10:02 a.m. And we have a roll call first. Begin with Ms. Kirby.
Pam Kirby. Kim Hartman. Barbara Perlebert.
George Jackson.
And Bonnie Sneed. All members are present, and the quorum is present. We don't have a flag, but we'll stand and do the flag and pretend like it's up on the board up there.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have two important guests with us here from ASBA, Dr. Tim Ogle and Steve Hyland. And the first item on our agenda is a study session, item 3A, an action item. The board action is required. The governing board will be presented with recommendations by the Arizona School Board Association, ASBA, related to the interview process. The board will implement for the position of district interim superintendent, may take action to direct ASBA to coordinate the process. We have some background information here. And at this time, we'll turn it over to Dr. Ogle.
Thank you, President Sneed. Thank you, members of the board, for having us back. We have been very busy over the last couple of weeks designing a process unique to set the five of you up for success and set Scottsdale Unified up for success here during this interim period. We have Steve and I have spent a significant amount of time talking about the kind of process and procedure that makes sense for this interim selection. And should we be fortunate enough to be selected as the search consultant to do the search for the permanent position, we will just integrate some of these process and procedural kinds of things into that process. As a number of candidates have already contacted us with regards to what the next steps might be. And so we want to provide, this service kind of in synergy with that service, because we think it makes great sense as this position will be very attractive to a number of folks around the country, actually, certainly around the state. We imagine working today to identify candidates to bring in for preliminary interviews on 7th, which is Thursday. And I understand you have a working session that day that starts at noon, is that correct? Mm-hmm. And so, and I don't know the length of time to anticipate the working session. Is there any kind of feedback, Madam President, you could give me with regards to the timing of
Anywhere between 2 and 4.
We only have one item. We're going to be discussing our strategic plan, the high standards and accountability. So, do we know who's going to present that? Mitch? Idea? Do you have any time frame idea on
as much time as you want to take. 30 minutes, probably, yeah.
Okay.
I would guess that would be.
Does that include discussion or just presentation?
I think it could include, again, though, it depends on how much discussion we have.
Okay. Yeah, that gives us a sense of how we might frame this, and then we will work with General Counsel to set up an agenda in executive session to talk to candidates in this preliminary fashion during the afternoon on the 7th. And once we get through our executive session today and we identify the number of folks that the board has an interest in interviewing, then we'll be able to set up the agenda for that afternoon session. As I indicated, Steve and I have done some screening of the applicants, and we'll be discussing those individuals with you here later. And then we would imagine a setting whereby we allow 1 hour blocks of time for each candidate to come in, interview with the board, and then have approximately a 30-minute period between the candidates so that the board has time, just for whatever they need to do with regards to transitioning one candidate in and one candidate out. And then also, should one run over, it's not appropriate to have waiting in the outside, so to speak. So just out of courtesy to them. We think it's important that we standardize the questions so that each of the interim candidates that comes in and visits with you has the same questions in the same sequence. And we think those questions should focus upon getting the candidate to talk about their experience, their background, their resumes, and the purpose of that is for the 5 of you to learn everything you can, as much as you can, about that individual, because in this setting, that's probably the more important process, whereby when you're looking at, a search for a permanent replacement, there's much more opportunity for that kind of interaction to go 2 ways. I think at this point in time, we're really more interested in having these candidates address how they can help SUSD during the interim period. And so Steve will actually take feedback from today and script questions for you that meet those criteria, and then bring them on Thursday. So in advance of that, is there anything relative to that part of the interview that we have missed or that you want to provide additional feedback on? Okay. So we'll proceed that way, and then we will work on setting up the 1 hour blocks, 30-minute breaks between, trying to give a respectable amount of time for your working session, but still being able to communicate with the candidates specific times to be here. Then at the end of the day on Thursday, we'll ask the board to identify individuals that may want to come back for become a finalist for the interim position. Yes.
You may have said this, I'm sorry. On the questions that we come up with your assistant, are those provided to the candidates before they walk in the room?
They are not.
Okay.
And I think that the important part of reading into the question, I think what we want to happen is for the candidate to have to respond instinctively or intuitively to kind of what the flavor of the question is. For example, you can say, tell us what you're most proud about on your resume. And what the candidate identifies is telling just from that standpoint.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Jackson?
We received an email from Michelle over break about the number of candidates that we're looking at. I don't know what I'm supposed to keep quiet about. Is the number of candidates?
I don't think the number is.
Okay, so I think the number was 9 candidates. So we're looking at potentially interviewing 9 candidates at an hour and a half each.
We can help with the board in executive session, talking with you about some of the background information we may have on individuals that may pare that number down. And we ended up with 8, not 9.
Okay.
There was a 9th person that opted out at the last minute, and so. I think that not making a judgment on your behalf, but I doubt if you'll want to talk to all 8.
Okay, sure.
And my understanding is in executive session today, there will be a paper screening.
Yes, yes. The board will be provided with background information on each candidate on paper, and we'll collect that at the end of the session. And then either Steve or myself will contact each candidate later today, let them know what their status is and what to expect from here forward.
And then we should be able to have a better idea how long we need to set aside for that too. Ms. Crudy?
Thank you. Your response to Board Member Jackson's question reminded me I had another question. You talked about background. Do you mean that in the literal sense of the term, that you have done background checks, or more just their experience background, or both?
Great question, more of their experience background.
So it would be incumbent upon us, you guys to do the background.
Absolutely.
And at what point in the process does that take place?
It depends on the results of today's discussion.
Okay.
So if the board wants to talk to 8 candidates, we probably won't do 8 criminal background checks and, 8 procedures and all. We would anticipate another level beyond.
Okay.
If the board wants to talk to 2 candidates, then we would probably initiate that process more quickly.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mhm. Other questions? Steve, what did I miss?
Nothing. Mr. President, in terms of the board's action, all we're asking for is if that presentation suffices and you're comfortable with us moving on, it's just an action item to give us the direction to work between now and Thursday on what Dr. Ogle mentioned and the board's input.
I'd like to then make a motion to authorize ASBA to proceed with the preliminary process for the position of District Interim Superintendent search. Is there a second?
Second.
Kirby seconded. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is possible board action to approve a compensation range.
Let me address that if I can, Madam President. Because of we originally anticipated having a discussion and asking for action today in this item, but because of the varied nature of the applicant pool, I think it might be wise to talk about the candidates first, have the board give us direction on how we may want to proceed from here forward, and then come back to that once we've identified the preliminary candidates. That would be my recommendation.
Can I ask, this is Michelle Marshall for the recording, with respect to the compensation range discussion, do you think that will be something they can discuss on the 7th, or would that even be too early?
I think you can,
Okay.
and I think that would be appropriate, because we do want to move this as quickly as we can.
Right, okay.
Because the needs are eminent.
I just want to make sure we look at how we notice that for the 7th.
Okay.
We'll talk about that
We
after you
haven't
guys meet
set that out yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was going to be my question, was should we take this item and put it later today or wait until the 7th?
Really your prerogative. The Arizona School Boards Association does an annual salary survey. We had 176 respondents out of the 220 superintendents. So it's a very healthy and accurate salary survey. So we pretty much know what the competitive salaries are. I would encourage the board that the market is what it is. And this is a very complicated position that will require a lot of expertise. So that's where Tim and Steve's brains are with regards to giving you any counsel in that area.
Okay, then are we okay to table this till Thursday? Ms. Hartman?
Thank you. If possible, once we narrow down the candidates, if it's reasonable to have a salary discussion or range discussion at that point, I would suggest we do it today, so that, because we have such a large agenda for Thursday,
And
if we
already
can
know
do
which
it.
one, great.
Yeah,
Sure, it's your prerogative.
that'd be great.
Okay, so
Yeah, I agree. Knock it off. Get it out of the way.
okay, so we'll move that to after the executive session. Thank you. Ms. Kirby?
Again, to Board Member Jackson's question of, I need to be reminded on what's public and what's not. As far as the applicant pool, on Thursday, they will technically, physically be coming into somewhere, which I'm sure is going to be noticed where, for the interviews. So technically they're public. If someone were to stand at the door and just to take note of who's walking in the door, they would technically be public candidates at that point. True or not?
Well, go
I
ahead.
wouldn't think so. Under the case laws, they're not technically public until they're finalized. So
Thursday's not final. Thursday is,
It's preliminary.
are still preliminary.
Yeah, so it is protected,
Okay,
and it's at the candidate's risk that something like you described might happen.
okay,
But we will do everything we know how to do to protect that confidentiality.
so if Thursday's preliminary, that then leads one to conclude that there's a finalist step. So is there another round of interviews that they go through to be a finalist?
That's the board's that'll be the board's prerogative based on the results of Thursday.
Okay,
And to,
which may be based on the results of our discussion later
Exactly.
this afternoon.
right, you
Okay.
may want to bring a couple of folks back as finalists. One person may emerge and you say that is our finalist,
We may not even have a finalist.
or you may not, right. There's
Okay.
all of those options. And so as you think ahead, our goal for today and Thursday is to take the 8 individuals that have submitted documents and do our best to protect their confidentiality.
Okay, thank
We
you.
have people's careers in our hands.
Right, thank you.
Well, and I think also this will be, this is sort of an exercise for the executive superintendent search, and people will be watching to see how we handle that.
Absolutely.
Mrs. Hartman?
Thank you. Today, is there an agenda item where we may identify an acting superintendent?
Yes, there is.
Okay,
It's
I
on
just,
the agenda for today.
okay.
I think it is item 6-2.
Okay, thank you. I just didn't see it.
And we do have the agenda for Thursday, which we kind of kept open just in case that we were massaging it today. There is an item for possible board action that states the governing board will discuss and may consider establishing a finalist list for the position of district interim superintendent. So that would be the notice on Thursday. And so along the line of what Mrs. Hartman mentioned before, it says the governing board will discuss and may take action to appoint one board member along with district legal counsel to meet with successful finalists for the position of district interim superintendent to establish a work agreement contract that will be submitted to the board for consideration. Do we have thoughts on whether we want to move that to today along with the compensation range discussion or on Thursday? Appointing the board members, Ms. Hartman?
If it's reasonable to do it today, I would suggest we try to identify, what the process looks like if possible.
Everybody okay with that, Mrs. Kirby?
I have questions about that process. Do we want to do that, answer those questions now or later on when we get to that agenda item?
Let's put that up with the agenda.
Okay.
Okay, if there,
I think that's all I have.
that's all we have, okay. Then can I have a motion to convene an executive session?
So moved.
Mrs. Kirby, second? Second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, the time is 1:43, and we're going to reconvene our special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District Governing Board. Today is January 4th, and we will do the roll call again for the recording.
Pam Kirby.
Kim Hartman.
Barbara Perlifus
George Jackson.
and Bonnie Sneed. All members are present. Quorum is present. The next item on the agenda is possible board action, item 6-1. The governing board will discuss and may consider offering specific applicants for the position of district interim superintendent the opportunity to interview with the board. Do we have a motion? Ms. Hartman?
I'll make a motion that there are 5 candidates, candidates A, B, C, G, and H, as applicants and the opportunity to interview with the board for the position of the district interim superintendent.
Could A, B,
C is in cat, G is in girl, H is in Harry.
I'll second that motion. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 That motion passes 5-0. Next up is item 6.2. The governing board will discuss a transition plan and may consider designating a current district administrator as acting superintendent starting January 4th, 2016, and who will remain acting superintendent through such time as determined by the board. Discussion? Motion? Anything, Ms. Kirby?
Transition plan. And I'm looking for timing. Will we end date this acting superintendent? Do we leave it open? I'd like some of your experience.
Okay. If you end date it, then you run the risk of having to redo something later.
Mm-hmm.
If you word the motion as until a time determined by the board, it gives you flexibility. And I would just encourage you to do that, because as we go through the interim selection process, there could be, days of give and take along in that process.
Okay, so
Or you could word it until as such time as an interim superintendent is approved, identified, approved. To do it that way.
Carefully worded this is, and through such time as determined by the board, so that it
mm-hmm.
can be broadly interpreted, but we won't have two superintendents. We can't have two superintendents.
Right.
Right. So in the spirit of trust among us as board members, I do see the value in leaving it open-ended. My concern with the open-end date is Board Member Hartman's comments at our last meeting around some foreshadowing, is kind of how I looked at it, that we might go through this interim process without agreement on who that interim could be. So my question would be, if we come out of this interim process and we don't have agreement, does that then default to the acting, who could be our acting superintendent for 6 to 18 months while we look for a permanent search?
That would be the board's determination.
Okay.
Ms. Perleberg?
If you could clarify board's determination at that point, whether to turn the acting superintendent into the interim?
By default, if the motion were worded as you guys had originally talked about, by default, the acting would be seated until unseated.
Which would require us to successfully put it on an agenda to revisit the question.
And presumably you would do that the same day, the same moment that you approved an interim.
But if we couldn't approve an interim, if we couldn't get the majority vote on an interim.
Then by default, the acting would sustain.
Thank you, that's what I was trying to get clarification.
Just sustain as an acting superintendent.
Correct.
Until
An interim is identified and approved.
which could be, we could start the process over, right?
Questions, Mrs. Hartman?
Actually, no questions. I think I'm on the same page. I just would offer a motion, I think, based on what we're saying. I think it should. So what I think I'm hearing, what's that?
We can make a motion at any time.
All right. So the motion,
Wait. We can continue to have discussion.
Okay, let's put it
Right.
We can have discussion after the motion's made.
Okay. So the potential candidates for an acting superintendent are?
Could be anyone.
Anyone. Is that correct?
Sure.
What are the, could you clarify the responsibilities? I don't know who to look at here, sorry.
Well, I think your policy would, I don't have access to your board policy, but I would believe your board policy has expectations of the superintendent's responsibilities. So presumably, the acting sup defaults to those areas of responsibility during that acting period.
Okay, so I don't want to, I'm going to try to talk in code that I hope my colleagues will understand without violating executive session. We had some discussion about this decision and other decisions and what that telegraphs to our community or to our employees or our stakeholders. And I was sincere about some of the comments that I made. So I want to, this is hard to do but I just want to lay that out as we go through this discussion. I hope you're following me. I hope the four of you are following what I'm trying to say.
I think so.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you have any experience as far as what other districts typically do? We're in a position that we have one assistant superintendent, and so, I'm hoping that this will be a short-term thing, that we name an interim very soon, and my feeling is that it would be a natural progression to our assistant superintendent, the acting superintendent, until such time as we've hired an interim.
Have you seen any other districts name another position? Is that?
Standard practice would be, as board president described, ever is a long time, and other things occur in other locations, but kind of the standard practice would be the number two person in the chain of command would assume those responsibilities in the absence of the number one position.
True, by title, but there were also other direct reports to the superintendent beyond just that position. Correct?
Yes.
You're a direct report.
Yep.
Help me with the other ones. Tom and all SLT. So there could be some to preserve what we telegraph, and to also preserve some of the trust issues and moving forward issues for us as a board. I would just ask that we open our minds to something beyond standard practice.
What would that entail in your mind for next steps?
It could just be a different. I don't disagree with the leaving it open-ended, but that gives me concern. Like, as I stated, I'm concerned because of Board Member Hartman's comments at our last meeting very early on to seem to be laying the groundwork almost that we might come out of this interim process with no candidates. And I'm looking for an acting, and I may have misinterpreted, but it is we talked about perceptions and realities, and that's my perception, that's my reality. I'm looking at this acting position as someone who we may end up being our acting superintendent for much longer than a week or 4 weeks. It could be 6 to 18 months. And the reason I say that
6 to 18 several times, I'm wondering why that came from.
Because Board Member Hartman asked questions at our last board meeting that she kept asking, what if we need a backup plan? What if we come out of this without a decision? If we come out of this process without an interim decision, I think there'll be pressure on us as a board at some point to say, we need to move forward with the permanent, because we can't just be in this la-la land forever. And that's where the 6 to 18 months. We could get lucky and have a permanent by July 1. It may take us another year on top of that. So that's where I'm coming from, and I'm hoping that based upon our earlier discussions we had in the last exec, you can understand where I'm at.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, just so you know, that was not necessarily my intent. My original concern, in fact, my assumption is that we will, in a timely basis, identify an interim and then a permanent superintendent. So I didn't intend to imply anything other than that. The reason for my comment was that just putting stewardship in place and acting until there's an interim or a permanent, and I'm assuming there's an interim and then a permanent, that was the only reason. And it also, my comment was really centered around every day that we take to focus on an interim superintendent, we're taking away from securing a permanent superintendent, which the goals that we talked about, a window of time to get the best candidates would be, we'd need to identify through spring and probably have like a July 1 start. So that's where I'm kind of coming from in this process. So it wasn't to intimate that we wouldn't get to a decision, because I think we're actually following the process exactly the way we kind of articulated it, and see us moving productively down that path. So the acting is just to put a single point of contact, if you will, single person in place during that brief period of time. However, at the same time, I do think we probably need to make the wording open-ended enough so that we don't get ourselves in a situation that we get tied up in a place, although I don't think that will be the outcome, particularly based on our conversation.
So thank you for that. But there's the scenario that I laid out is still a possibility, and I struggle with that. We all talked about our struggles earlier. I really am struggling with that. So I'm ready to make a motion.
You don't have a motion yet?
No.
Okay. Any other discussion before that? Okay.
Well, I guess one point, just to clarify, are there any certification requirements or any requirements for an acting superintendent that might eliminate or narrow down our list very significantly?
Not in this role.
Okay.
I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Mr. Jackson?
No, you're right, Tim, but I think that was one thing that I think we expressed as a board that was important to us.
For interim.
Sorry?
For interim.
Yeah, I guess that's
I was
right.
asking for
Maybe
acting.
I'm not talking about acting. You're
I
right.
was asking for
You're
acting.
Right. That was,
Just a bridge to get us from point A to point B.
right.
Mrs. Hartman?
To Board Member Kirby's legitimate concern about telegraphing an end game, for that reason, it's maybe prudent to go actually with what typical protocol is, because there is nothing to telegraph with that other than that's what the protocol is. So if that's the objective, that may be the way to address that concern of yours.
Mr. Kirby?
However, as protocol is based on title, not based on the individual. So I'm going to, again, reiterate my desire to move forward with this board, clean slate, with full support, and suggest that we consider something that's possibly different than protocol.
And how would that not telegraph? How does that address your concern of telegraphing an outcome?
I addressed it in exec, and I can't say it again without without violating exec. I guess to move forward, I'm really trying to figure out how to say this without violating exec. I said it all in exec. I'm surprised you're not. I see George saying, yeah, because I think he understands where I'm trying to go.
Thought I did, Pam. I'm not trying to be arrogant. I'm not as clear, I think, as maybe by my body language. I'm being dishonest. I'm not quite as clear as my body language means.
Okay, let me tell you this. Based on the candidate pool, what do we telegraph? Based upon some conversations that we have had both on the dais, public, around trust, could we as a board step out of the box and step away from protocol to preserve the candidate pool and what that telegraphs, and also begin to rebuild our relationships as a board?
Mr. Jackson?
I am all for rebuilding trust on this board, believe me, but I think you're setting us up because we don't know honestly, who you have in mind, to be just out there. And you are sort of setting us up to disagree with you if we're not necessarily to go with, hear me out.
Yeah.
To move forward with what a standard protocol is the same. It doesn't telegraph anything. It is truly an acting position at the moment. It doesn't, and it's something that gets us through this tenuous moment.
Okay, then one way to address, because I think I'm being set up too. So one way to address it is to end date it. Is to end date the acting. My concern is that we will come out of this interim process and we won't have an interim superintendent, and then by default we are then left with the acting superintendent to take us through either another interim search or an extended permanent search. So one way to address that concern is to have, instead of leaving it open-ended, is to end date it, which then if we do have a failed interim search, we are forced to come back as a board and have the discussion again, which is a compromise that I would offer up.
Look at that.
I want, let's see if I can, no.
Can I just listening to what you're saying, why can't you just call a meeting and say, okay, we don't want this, whoever it is, as the acting superintendent, let's vote on somebody else? Couldn't they do that? Yeah. I mean,
it's up to the board president to set the agenda.
any of you can ask for something to be put on the agenda.
But it would be up to the board in all due respect, I have asked for agenda items that have been for years that have never made it to an agenda item. I guess I'm looking for a safety net, and I'm also looking to my fellow board members to meet me in the middle on a compromise. And the compromise is to achieve your objective, to achieve my objective, is to end date it. So that if the interim fails, which you're giving me your assurance that that's not what you intended, and I appreciate that and thank you. If it fails, then at least we have another bite at the acting apple.
I guess, tell me if I'm wrong and I can't ask this, but I don't see a scenario, I don't understand about a failure if the interim fails. I don't understand that concept, I guess.
Yeah.
Can you help me?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take, we have to vote on the interim.
Yeah.
It has to come to a vote, and it quite possibly, abstentions could kick in. I mean, there are so many ways that this could be a 2-2 tie, people may not show up, there are so many ways that could happen. I'm just asking if,
I didn't know how,
I guess I'm asking you to trust me to help me trust you. It's a step.
So what I was going to offer is a compromise. Would it make sense to go with protocol with an end date? The end date, in my mind, could be either kind of a January 30th, or if we wanted to give because I'm coming from the place that I think we'll have an answer by the end of this week, and then we will go into our January meeting and we will make a final decision. So that January 30th would give us the compromise. If we thought it would take,
I would actually say January 31st.
I think, 31st, yeah. That's what I was going with.
That's actually,
or I was going to say February 15th, if you thought we needed another board meeting.
I am very hopeful we'll come out of this.
okay, could we make it up through February 9th, not necessarily it's gonna go that long, but, the end date, that's our next meeting in February, so that we wouldn't have to call an emergency meeting.
There's a number, I'd prefer January 31st. I think it's a natural, if you truly believe that we'll be through this process by the end of, I think this week is aggressive, maybe next week, then that gives us 2 weeks buffer, right, to get to the 31st. And if you are sincere in your assertion that we'll get through this process, then the 31st should really be no concern.
Can we do February 4th, can we extend it 4 days, would you be comfortable
With
with
a
that?
study session that day.
So hopefully, we won't need to even do anything by then, I mean, it'll be done. But rather than asking everybody to come back in for another meeting, and because sometimes it's hard to do all that together.
30 days from today, 1 month from today.
If I may add
Ms. Pilger,
finer point to that clarity, in that case, looking at the calendar, if an interim is appointed, prior to the end of this month, obviously that language would kind of need to be included in the motion that while it's this acting superintendent until an interim is appointed, but not to exceed this date.
Yes.
That kind of puts a little just finer point on it, I think.
and is February 4th okay? If at that point, then we will have an agenda, and if we don't already have a person named, and then we can have February 4th.
I guess I was hoping really for January 15th, and I felt like I was giving 2 weeks additional buffer to the 31st, and now there's another week to the 4th, when I really wanted the 15th. I mean, I want some commitment, I guess. I want some demonstrated commitment from my fellow board members that you're sincere about this interim process. And the fact that I'm getting pushback on having on a 31st gives me concern. That will be, we've got so much to do in this district between now and June 30th, when we break for the summer. I feel, what's the word? I feel slippage. I feel slippage, and that I'm kind of being drug out, and that this district's being drug out. I'd like to put some internal pressure on ourselves to go ahead and put this to bed. And that's why I'd offer up the 15th, but the 31st seemed like a really sincere compromise.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a motion?
Yeah.
You want to include it in the motion?
I'll let someone else, because the wording is complicated. I can amend the motion.
I'll make the motion. Okay, I'll make the motion and subject to, I'm sure, edit. So, I motion that we designate our current district administrator, we designate our current district administrator, Assistant Superintendent Dr. Pam Fenton, as acting superintendent starting January 4th, 2016, to be succeeded by the sooner of an appointed interim superintendent or January 31st, 2016.
I'll second it.
More discussion? I'm sorry.
Now, my only question is that I agree with, yes, you did very well. The word appointed, though, it's not an appointment, is it a vote or no?
I mean, you're voting, I don't.
Board appointment.
It is a board appointment? Okay, then, yes, I'll second that.
No, George seconded.
Oh, sorry.
Is there any other discussion? Okay, then all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
That motion passes 5-0. Board members?
Kim, I just need to go with, I missed one of.
Okay. After this.
Okay, I motion that we designate our current district administrator, assistant superintendent, Dr. Ann as acting superintendent, starting January 4th, 2016, to be succeeded by
The sooner or earlier of whichever word. I said the sooner of, earlier might be more appropriate,
succeeded
by, the board appointed interim superintendent for January 31st, 2016.
board appointed by January 31st.
Does succeeded by January 31st, that's a little odd.
Yeah.
I know what you meant, but it's not.
You're not gonna be able to.
Did I
Well, no,
say
you
that?
might be able to. I mean, I just cut out a lot of others.
How about instead of succeeded by, up until the board appointed interim superintendent or January?
June,
Yeah.
because we,
Now,
there's
this
going to be
is good, though. This is something right. This is something we don't want to,
and be,
kick ourselves later that we,
so they actually have to begin service, because we don't want a lapse in service.
Correct.
That's
Yeah.
what we're
Right.
looking to avoid, the lapse.
That's better language.
right, let's say it again.
Repeat it.
Okay. I motion that we designate our current district administrator, assistant superintendent, Dr. Pam Sitton, as acting superintendent starting January 4th, 2016, to be succeeded by the board-appointed interim superintendent by January 31st, 2016.
It's by the earlier of,
Begin date?
of
By,
the start date of the interim superintendent or January 31st
to be succeeded by the start
date,
date of the interim
interim superintendent
superintendent
or January 31st.
Of the board appointed interim, or is that making this a little complicated?
to be succeeded by the board-appointed interim superintendent by the start date of the interim superintendent or January 31st, 2016.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Okay. Second by you, George.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, then we want to bring back our item 3A2. Possible board action to approve a compensation range for the interim superintendent position. The governing board will discuss and may consider an as for recommended compensation range for the position of district interim superintendent. We'll take that item first.
Okay.
Need help.
Do you want me to take a whack at a motion?
Is there discussion, Tim?
If you don't mind, I would suggest in light of the just immediately previous action, that you do pro rata
Yeah, I was gonna say that, actually.
at the rate of.
Right. So, can I ask a question? So my takeaway from the, state study of superintendent compensation based on peer criteria, which include districts over 15,000 students, urban, K-12, those were the narrowing filters.
Right.
When I looked at those three filters, what was left was a range on an annualized basis, somewhere between, in my mind, it was 175 and 225. So that was my takeaway, and so a pro rata version of that would make sense to me. Is that,
Yes.
do you have a different takeaway?
No, that would be our
study?
recommendation.
Okay.
You know, use that study, as you may have noted in the demographic characteristics of the study, 176 of the 220 superintendents, or board presidents responded. So it's a pretty robust analysis. And I would agree that that range is probably market appropriate.
Okay.
I would feel more comfortable if we capped it at 200, because of what our previous superintendent, what his base salary was, and we're talking base salary. There won't be benefits or that kind of thing. So I would feel more comfortable on annualized basis of 185 to 200.
And my rationale for saying 225 is that often interim position, there is a premium. That interim position actually on a pro rata basis could be more than what the permanent role is. So our ability to attract somebody may require a premium. It's not committing that we do, because some candidates are available, and some candidates, you know, they're available to different degrees. So I'd like to give us at least the latitude, although I'm not advocating we go on the high end, it just gives us the latitude to do what we need to do to attract the best talent in the interim role.
And what the board's doing at this point is establishing a target so that we can communicate to candidates what the expectations are within a range, but the board will ultimately approve a work agreement for the interim superintendent. So it comes back to you anyway. This is more for the candidate's understanding of, you know, yes, I want to come and interview for that position, compete for that position, so to speak. And a couple of folks intimated benefit packages and those kind of things. Many times districts for interim positions will have independent contractor type models so that you don't have to deal with retirement contributions and, you know, allowances for, you know, transportation and relocation and all those kind of things. It's just a per diem per month kind of rate.
Kirby.
I on this particular one, I perceive your intentions as just flexibility. And I agree, more flexibility we have doesn't mean we have to exercise that flexibility, but it gives us wiggle room. So.
We want to take that in a form of possible, notice is possible board action, so you could, form that in form of motion.
I'll make an attempt at it.
Are you ready?
Let's see.
This would be item A2.
A2, yeah, got it. I'd like to make a motion to recommend an interim superintendent compensation between pro rata, sorry, Sandra, a pro rata compensation range between $175,000 and $225,000.
I'll second.
All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. The next item is item 3A3. The governing board will discuss and may take action to appoint one board member who, along with district legal counsel, will meet with a successful finalist for the position of district interim superintendent to establish a work agreement contract that will be submitted to the board for consideration. Mrs. Kirby.
Again, in light of our efforts to rebuild trust, you know, it's very clear to all we are a split board. I would just like to offer up that instead of one board member, it's two. That still maintains, we don't violate any open meeting laws with two.
And we've done that in the past, and, yeah, I think we've done that in the past.
So that's, and that the two I guess it goes without saying, but I'm gonna say it just so the intent is clear. We are a split board, and that there's two that represent that split. So it's,
I get what you're saying.
okay, thank you. Thank you, George.
Everybody in the room.
I think that's a great idea. What if it, okay, because we've approved a range, so.
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to make a motion that myself and Mrs. Kirby be the, two board members that would, along with district council, be the successful finalists for the position of district interim superintendent to establish a work agreement contract that will be submitted to the board for consideration. Mrs. Perlberg, second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
That motion passes 5-0.